Hello, it's Cisvolk. Time to enjoy card making with me. In today's video I will be working with NUVO Shimmer powders and use them for carlacreaties Craft Emotions' newest release, the koala and panda stamps. They come in Dutch and English, and you see the sets are mirrored to each other. You see, mirrored. So I'm going to use the NUVO Shimmer powders. Beside these shimmer powders there are also mica powders or explosion powders and pigment colors. These are all products that are highly pigmented powders and react with water. They work more or less similarly. Mainly with bright surprising colors, which I like a lot. For the cards I'm going to make today I'm using the powders as a background, in combination with the stencils and also to color the stamps. I have 3 stencils here from carlacreaties, which can be combined very nicely with this lovely stamp set. You can use the balloons as a background, and you can combine the cute panda with the cupcakes. I made cards with the other stencil, the heart stencil, where I used oxide ink. You can find this card on my social media channels like Facebook, Instagram or Pinterest. Also these hearts from the Love Puns collection you can use as a background to combine these stamps. When you make tiny strings on the hearts, they will look like heart balloons. I will demonstrate it later in the video. Before we start stamping, I first grab a 10.5 by 14.8 piece of watercolor card paper. I used the smooth, brilliant white watercolor paper from Craft Emotions. That's 200 gram watercolor paper. It's very smooth and sometimes you can hardly see the difference with regular paper. But you will notice that soon enough when you start working with it. It is very easy to work on with water-based inks. If you are going to stamp on watercolor paper, you need to remember to use inks that can withstand water, such as archival ink, Memento Lux ink or VersaFine ink, for example. Now I like to stamp with a clear block with VersaFine ink and then heat emboss the print with embossing powder. This has its advantages when coloring. You stay within the lines easier and the lines stay nice and dark, smooth and shiny, which I love. I'm going to stamp this very cute koala first. And what I love about it is that you can also stamp this stamp very well upside down. How cool did Carla come up with this idea again? Also take a look at carlacreaties' YouTube channel. She has tutorial videos here where she uses these same stamps and shows you how to color with pencil, brush pens and Copics. Versamark ink makes it very easy to stamp with a clear block. Versamark ink makes a very nice crisp stamp impression in one go. It can also be done with a Memento Lux, but then I don't like my image as crisp and prefer to use a stamping platform, which I also do often. The advantage of Memento Lux is that it is a bit greasier and stickier and stays wet longer to heat emboss nicely. I want to heat emboss the text right away, so I can see if it's in the right place and if everything fits nicely on the card. The best way to ink the stamp is to ink the stamp with the ink pad and not the other way around. This prevents you from pressing too hard on the stamp, which can cause a little too much ink to get between the grooves. Hover the clear block above the paper, and that's a nice thing about clear blocks, you can see through them. And press firmly and then lift straight up. Now I take a piece of paper to catch the embossing powder. I sprinkle clear embossing powder from Ranger on top, very carefully. I also sprinkle the powder on as soon as possible after stamping. As long as the ink is still moist, the powder sticks to it. The rest of the embossing powder can go back into the jar. Let's have some Koalaty time. Well, we have some Koalaty time, Carla. It is so much fun with all this beautiful stuff. Now I think about adding a cute little balloon, which I can stamp and also sprinkle powder on top. This is a fun little balloon, one that is half deflating, so it looks like it's flying around. I add some embossing powder first and then I will clean my stamps. To clean my stamps I always stamp the excess ink on a scrap piece of paper. Then I grab a microfiber cloth that I use specifically for this purpose. I have a blue cloth for water-based ink and a pink one for pigment ink. I spray those wet with some water from a spray can, and that's how I wipe the stamp clean. You can also clean your stamps with baby wipes, but this is not my preference. Baby wipes can leave some of those fibers behind, and those are very annoying when you want to stamp again. You can get those ugly lines. And then the print won't be as nice. Hence this short-haired microfiber cloth. I just wash it out in the washing machine with the rest of the laundry, and it is usable for a very long time. Heat embossing the embossing powder is done with a heat tool. With watercolor cardstock or other porous paper, it is best to do this on the back side of the paper. Also make sure the heat tool is warmed up before you begin. This causes the powder to melt quickly, so you don't have to heat the paper for a long time. If you heat too long on the same spot, the embossing powder sinks between the fibers of the paper and you lose the beautiful shiny relief. There is also a chance that the paper will curl. This is less likely to happen with a thicker paper. The nice shiny edge ensures you that you can color within the lines, which makes coloring a lot easier. I will be needing a mask for one of the cards in a moment, so I'm going to make that one first. For that I'm using this bright yellow stamp masking tape from Craft Emotions. It's paper with a very light gum glue on the back, similar to post-it notes. It fits right on here. For making a mask I prefer to use the regular Memento water-based ink. And I do because this ink soaks into the paper and dries quickly. The VersaFine stays wet a little longer and stains when you run your finger over it to cut out the shape. Yes, you can use it, but then you have to wait a long time for it to dry. This Memento ink again is not useful to use on watercolor card paper, because then your ink will run when you color with water. Water-based ink you also need if you want to color an image with alcohol markers. It is very handy to have both types of ink though. So one pigment-based and one water-based. It doesn't matter if the stamping is not perfect. It is good enough if we can see the outer lines to cut out. Look, you can also stamp extra loose leaves or confetti. Also a lot of fun. Cutting out a mask is a patient job, but I like cutting. If you don't like to cut, I also show you how to make a card without a mask, so no worries. It is useful to stay a little bit inside the lines. Then the mask will stick better and you will not have a white border left over around the image. I cut out a balloon and also the koala and the tree with leaves. Don't worry if one of the leaves tears off. This happened to me too. You can just glue them on. It will all fit together still. And the mask is temporary anyway. I also stamped the image again on another panel, this time with the koala upright. And with this one I don't use a mask, so I can show you that it could be done without if you are careful. Here I have a light color of shimmer powder, Jade Fountain, that I'm going to use as a background. I made swatches of the NUVO Shimmer powders I have. It is always helpful to have swatches to get an idea of what you want to make. This black storm cloud color I will be using to color the koala. The Jade Fountain I want to use as a quiet background. In the Jade Fountain there are also other shades, like a little pink, a little blue and yellow. And I'm going to use those colors later to add details and color the stencils with. This is a swatch for the green, the falling leaves. And this is the yellow, the sunray crozet. This red one I'm not going to use. Here the blue blitz. And here's another one, another swatch for the sunray crozet. And here the cherry bomb. Here's one black one again. I made several swatches of it. You can see that also on the black ink there are some pigments from the pink and blue powders. That again is the same pink as from the cherry bomb. So these colors combine very well with each other and can be mixed very well. So we start with a jade fountain. Here one with mask and here one without. You actually need very little powder. I gently tap the bottle. You can see very light powder coming onto the paper. I want powder on the other panel as well, but I don't want powder on the image. Here I sort of use my hand as a mask. I applied pretty little powder at this point. You can also do more powder than less. And I'm on the cautious side, because there will be another stencil image on top of this later. So I want to keep it light. Now I always use a brush. A special brush that I put a little washi tape on. So I keep it specifically for my explosion powders. And I won't accidentally do anything else with it. I don't want thick clumps of ink all together. You can, but then you get this effect. Build-ups of color where there's a lot of powder. With the blue one, you can also see it well. Because I will go over it later with a stencil, I want to spread it out a bit. And also because I want to spread the powder nicely. I'm going to wipe some of the powder away from the stamped image. At the leaves it's not so bad, but I definitely don't want it on the eyes and on the places where it should be light. But again, between the leaves and behind the koala. Well, you see almost nothing of it now, but after spraying with water on top, you will see the colors pop up. Just wait. Also with the other card, I spread the powder a bit, especially between the leaves. You have the option to adjust the water spray to your preference. This blend sprayer sprays quite large drops and is also unreliable in the size of the drops, which I often use, but I do not prefer to use it for shimmer powders. This is a very small spray bottle. It sprays a very fine layer of water. Just enough to spray a thin layer. I've had this one in my house for a long time. You can't buy this one anymore, but I'm sure there are water spray bottles for sale that spray similar. If you use a regular blend sprayer, you will get somewhat larger droplets and the result will look a little different. Also nice, but a bit wetter and more uneven. I spray and use as little water as possible, because the more water you spray, the more it will run out. Can be pretty too, but I often find it less pretty. I actually could have used a little more powder for this example, as you are not likely to see that much now. Some powder ended up on the koala, but that's okay, we will color over that later. In the meantime, I heat set it first. I was a little too careful on the first try. It is a very light color and I felt it could use a little more powder. So I sprinkle in a little more powder, spread the powder with a brush and spray it wet again. You can also sprinkle in the powder while it's still wet, but even then the result is different. I prefer to sprinkle powder, spread it with a brush, wet it and let it air dry. I find that gives the best result. Here you see the cards with a second layer of powder on top. The result is still very light now. On my swatch I used even more pigment. But I intentionally kept it so light because I will go over it with a stencil and otherwise I find the background too busy. I clean my work plate well because the powder is hard to see, but it does stain the back of your envelope and paper if you're not careful. While the panels are drying, I continue making a matching envelope. For this I have a piece of chipboard that I put inside the envelope, and I do this for two reasons. It absorbs the moisture that will come on it later because of course this is just thin paper. Also we want to protect the back of the envelope, and it keeps the seams of the back of the envelope from pushing through to the front. It is also nice and sturdy to work on, so multiple benefits. I stamp part of the image on one corner of the envelope. And then I stamped a little balloon there a few more times. Drop them over the edge too, that looks nice. Funny how it looks like the balloons are flying away. I will heat emboss the ink of this envelope. And the second envelope I let dry like this, without embossing powder. Also a funny little balloon. Let's continue with the card panels. I attached the balloon stencil to one of the card panels with magnets. My craft mat from Craft Emotions is magnetic, so that's very handy. If your craft mat is not magnetic, you can also attach your stencil with tape to the bottom of the card. I sprinkle a small dot of powder of each color on my craft mat. The sunray crozet, the cherry bump, the blue blitz and the falling leaves. I then use mini foam pads, those blending sponges that are interchangeable with Velcro. What you do next? You spray some water on your glass plate or on a plate or on a clear block. The most useful is on a white surface, because then you can see the color better. Let's start with a yellow one. I take out a scrap piece of paper. This is cheap watercolor cardstock that I like to use to test things out on. Then you dampen your sponge a little bit in the puddle of water. And then you dip your sponge into the pile of shimmer powder. On my scrap paper I test out what the result will be when dabbing with the sponge on the paper. If I apply too thick or too thin powder, and if my sponge is maybe too wet. This is already quite dark yellow, very concentrated. Now I choose a balloon and dab the powder on it. It's very easy. This way you pick balloons that are far apart, so that the same colors don't end up next to each other. You can see now that the green shines through the balloon, but that also makes the balloons transparent. Try putting more pigment on one side of the balloon to give some shadow effect. It is a balance between the amount of water and the amount of pigment. Where the mask is, you can very easily color over it with a sponge. The underlaying image stays nice and white. I have a little too much water on this pink sponge, which makes it more difficult to apply. You have to be careful not to have water run under the stencil, although having more water makes it more light and is easier on making shadows. With this green one you can see that it works better. Now I messed a little with the pink ink over the blue balloon, unfortunately, the one in the top left corner, but I don't let it discourage me. What I do next? I grab a water brush, and this is a Tombow water brush, and I use it to wipe out the ink a little bit. I use the dark shade as my advantage to make a shadow effect. It looks like a hot mess, but it will dry up better. I wet it and wipe out the ink. That way you can save it a little bit. I use a tissue to dab up any excess water that is in my brush, or to wipe the brush clean after picking up pigment from the paper. For the second panel I am going to try to do the hearts a little lighter than the balloons on the first card. The pigment of the powder is so bright you make very brightly colored cards quite quickly with it, which I really love, but with this card you want the attention to go to the koala and not too much to the background, so let's just see what will work here. So on this panel you don't have a mask, which makes it a little more difficult. But I'll show that you can also work with a stencil without a mask. The yellow hearts are again transparent, which gives it a nice translucent effect. This yellow balloon can very well be stenciled over the tree and the leaves, because you can color over this later. At the buttocks of the koala I try to avoid the koala. If the powder is too dry or the plate dried up, you spray another puddle of water on your plate and dip your sponge in again. I wouldn't spray water directly on the powder. With that you would make the colors mix directly with each other. And it's more fun if you pick up the loose colors on the sponge. This way you are also more likely to see the colors as loose colors on the paper if you look closely. You can see this best with a relatively dry and dark print. I made it lighter now and see that you quickly use too much water. And then what can happen is that the water runs under your stencil, which of course happens here. With thicker, therefore drier and more intense darker ink, you get crisp lines easier. Here with the paw of the koala, I try to avoid the paw a bit. I am now still using the sponge. With these small parts you could also color the parts using a water brush. Or maybe dab using a cotton swab. Oh look, I'm coloring the tree. But it's alright, we will fix this. I now shift the stencil so that I can color one more heart at the top of the stencil. And then I set it aside to dry. The mask of the first card can now be removed. And I can use that mask again for the envelope. It still sticks just fine. What I do need to watch out for is the large amount of red and blue pigment on the mask, which could possibly spill over onto the thin envelope paper. Now we are going to color the koala. For this I use the Black Storm Cloud Shimmer powder. And I like to work with a water brush with a firm fine tip. Here I have the thinnest version of the Tombow water brush. There is water in the brush and I also use a jar with water to rinse the brush in regularly. I also keep a cloth with it to dab the brush dry again. A clean and damp but not wet brush you dip right into the powder. Then I take out my scrap paper again and with a very small amount of powder you can create a very dark black line. See? Then you can just even write with it. But we don't want the koala to be dead black, so we're going to mix the black with a little more water. And then you can see that the color becomes a little blue-grayish. Now I start coloring the koala. I want his butt light and the sides that get shadows a little darker. With watercolors, I personally prefer to start in the places where it should be darker. So I start coloring here. And now I want to make it flow a little lighter. So I dip a little bit in a jar of water, wipe the brush slightly and then spread the ink. Again, clean the brush and spread some pigment to the lighter part. That way you can pick up new paint each time, start coloring on part where it should be dark and then spread it out to lighter parts. And because heat embossing gives you raised edges, your ink doesn't run out as quickly. You can also very easily apply a second layer over the previous ink to get it even darker. And you can also even lighten parts you find too dark with water and a clean brush, or with water and just a tissue. Look how cute! Well, that's just how you continue coloring. I am not an expert in this. It is just the way how I do it and I am still learning. I personally find determining which parts to darken or lighten one of the hardest things about coloring. Luckily, Carla always makes beautiful colored examples with her stamps, so you always have a reference to look at if you don't know. And what you can also do is look up a similar image or animal on the internet to see what it actually looks like. I did that a lot when coloring the guinea pigs. If you are curious about the cards I made with the guinea pigs, I encourage you to check out my Pinterest page. In the section Francis People Productions, you can find them in the section Craft Emotions cards all together. I shall leave a link down below in the descriptions for you. Now we're going to color the nose, and it has to be almost black. To do this, dip a reasonably dry brush into the powder, so that you really have powder on the tip of your brush. And then you color a thin line along the edge of the nose. Now you rinse the brush again and wipe it dry on the cloth. And then you wipe a very little bit along this black edge so that it blends out. The middle you leave white. That way it looks like the nose is thick. The pads on the feet and the inside of the ears we want pink. There's more than enough powder on my work mat. First test it again on the scrap paper because I think it's too dark. If it sits for a while, the water evaporates and it's dark again, so some water needs to be added. For the cheeks, I also always like them to be a little pink. I usually dab a little bit, and then the color flows out a little by itself. The cheeks are usually diagonally under the eyes, or next to the corners of the mouth, depending on which animal you color. Another bit of pink on the lip. So cute! I color the balloon a little darker at the bottom and lighter at the top, in the same way I mostly color. Start at the dark part, clean the brush and spread it out. Be sure to keep the opposite part light enough to have contrast and shade. The leaves I color very simply, quickly with green. The tree trunk I want to color a little dramatic. Maybe it's a little crazy, but I like to try it out. I make it pink first and then go over it with black. Then it looks like it's hanging in the shadow. And again, if I don't like it, I lighten it with some water, or I throw another color over it. I could have used green, but I like the red. The pigment mixes so well on the paper. This balloon bothers me that it is not evenly colored, so I color over it with green. As long as you use a lot of pigment, it is quite opaque. Now to color the other card. There I first started with a green branch. Anyway, the blue heart on the branch needed to be eliminated. Now I make a brown color on the work mat by mixing the pink with the green. And because I paint with this brown color over the green layer, this also mixes with each other. Layers on top of each other with different colors give much more depth to an image. With some black, I make the branch a little darker anyway. Coloring the koala is again the same as before. But what I had just forgotten was the shadow in the eye. With the blue ink, I draw a very thin line on the side of the eye, a little bit away from the edge. Very slightly and very thin. I hope you can see it well that way. And you do the same on the other side. It works very nicely only with a thin brush or brush with a little pigment on the tip of the brush. Also apply only very light pressure. Now you can blur it a little bit with water or make it more blurry at the bottom. It is now the next day for me. I left the card panels under a pile of stuff overnight so they could straighten out a bit. Now I still don't think they are finished. Despite the bright colors, I still find it a bit bare near the stencil, so I want to draw lines around it. I don't think this one is quite finished either. The edges are too wide for me. I like it better when the heart runs over the edge too, like this blue heart above. So I'm going to stencil some more hearts that fall over the edge first. And it's also nice that I am doing it today now that the panel is dry and not yesterday when it was still wet, because then the stenciled part under it would have run out. I'll do it the same way again with the same sponge tools though. As you can see, I put the balloons on this card a little lighter and the balloons on the other card a little darker. The lighter balloons fall a little more into the background, making the koala stand out more, and in the other one the balloons are still too bright and come very much towards you. I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to add some details with a white pen. You have different white pens for that. For example, there's the Sakura Uniball from Signo, you have the white Jelly Roll pen from Sakura, and from Posca you also have all kinds of sizes of white paint markers. You can use all of them, but I prefer the Posca marker for drawing or writing on this pigmented powdery ink. With the Jelly Roll pens you have the chance that they will somehow block or clog. I suspect due to the powder getting into the pen. The Posca marker covers very well and it also works very well. But the other two white gel pens also do well, depending on what you need them for. I like to put 3 little dots on the cheek. I put little light dashes on the paws and I put a little line on the butt. And in the little balloon, a little light stripe. On the balloons, I put the stripe on all of them on the same side, and preferably where the ink is darker. The powder gives off a little on the marker, so I wipe it off in between. I just read on the Posca website that you can rinse your nibs under the tap or activate them with water if needed when a little dry. That's good to know. The leaves also get a little dash of light with the Posca marker. Now I think the outline of the balloons is a little bare. You can outline the balloons with different materials. I'm going to try it out first on my test paper. I messed around on that anyway, and on that I can see very well and try out what fits and what doesn't. With a gel pen you can outline them. I like that. But I don't have the gel pen in all colors I need, so unfortunately I can't do anything with that. You can outline them with a pencil. Then you get a grey line. In this case I think that's too light in color. It can also be done with a fine liner. Here I have the 05 Sakura Pigma Micron, which I really like to use to touch up stamped images. But I have the idea that even this pen can sometimes falter and get stuck on heavily pigmented substrates. And since I like to keep this pen in good condition, I take the next fine liner. That one is the Stabilo fine liner. This one also does a perfect job over pencil and alcohol markers. I also like this one just a little deeper black. But it doesn't necessarily matter what you use. Each product has its pros and its cons. You could trace the balloons over with the stencil. If it were clean, I could do that. I already tried that with this blue heart. But what you then get is a line on the inside of the heart, and also not in places where the ink may have run out. Therefore, I prefer to draw a line around it by hand, in the places I want it to be. The hardest part for me is that I can't hang my head above it because of the camera. You see, I already made a small mistake. That's not a big deal. In the meantime, I have them all traced over and then it looks like this. So let's continue with the envelopes. On this envelope I stuck the mask, and on the other one we will do it again without the mask. The method is the same as on the card panel, but with the difference that this paper is much thinner and more fragile. I again sprinkle some jade fountain on the paper and I use the brush to wipe the ink off the mask and spread it a bit over the corner of the envelope. Instead of cleaning my work mat first, I put a block of paper under it. Then I don't have to clean up the ink on my work mat yet. And that way I keep the bottom of my envelope clean. Now I make sure the heat tool is hot. And as soon as it is hot, we start. While my heat tool is on and hot enough, I mist the shimmer powder with a fine water bottle. And right after that, I blow it dry with the heat tool. The envelope is not made of watercolor paper, so logically it turned out rather bumpy, as you can see. But that is totally fine, because I simply put it under a pile of stuff, or I'll briefly iron it with the iron. If you take the mask off, you can see better what the color looks like on the envelope. It's very subtle. Again, with a hard stencil, I'm going to make some hard balloons with the shimmer powder. The shimmer powder that I still have on my work mat. And I also try to do that as lightly as possible. After each heart, blow on it quickly as possible with the heat tool to dry it. Unlike on watercolor paper, you can't mess around too much on regular paper. So right now I'm trying to find a brown color to use for the tree branch, and for that I mixed green with pink. Right now it's still a little too light in color. The glass plate is a hot mess, but that doesn't matter. I love messing around and trying to get a nice brown with green and pink. Then I dry the ink and very lightly apply with an aqua brush as dry as possible a second darker layer of ink on the envelope. So on top of the color you see now. Finally a little shadow on the top and bottom of the branch with black to suggest the bulge of the branch. And then the branch is finished. This envelope I'm going to do in a slightly different way. Here I don't have a mask, but I do want to apply a light base layer of green. Again, I spread the powder to the places where we want color. And again, we make sure the heat tool is warmed up beforehand. We have pieces of chipboard inside the envelope to protect the paper. Make sure there's no pigment on the eyes. Then we spray it wet and quickly blow it dry with the heat tool. Now you can see that I sprayed a little too much water in the middle, and you can see that the water is running. I like that a little less. I like it more when you can still see those colored speckles. Now on to the stencil. I haven't cleaned this stencil yet and it still has ink on it. I want to use that ink as a background on the envelope. I use a slightly thicker aqua brush to smear the color of the stencil on the paper. From outside to inside I try to transfer the color this way. Between colors I wipe my brush clean. And this way you can also keep the balloons nice. Remember that on this envelope I used an embossed stamp image. We color the koala and the balloons the same way again. However, this paper is very thin. You must be very light in water. The paper will bulge, but I have a tip for you to solve that a little. I use the heat tool in between coloring stamped parts. The envelopes are dry, but still quite bumpy. I'm in a hurry and want them smooth quickly. An overnight under a pile of books takes me too long. So I will iron them. Now I have to be a bit careful with the envelope on which I have applied embossing powder. I will put a white sheet of printer paper on top of it to protect my iron. The heat of my iron is on a low setting. And because my craft mat can withstand heat well, I can iron over it very well and it flattens out. You can also iron on your ironing board, but I advise you to use heavy-weighted chipboard or cardboard under and between the envelope or cardstock you are ironing. If there wasn't any chipboard inside the envelope, the lines of the back of the envelope would show through to the front. 100% flat you will never get it, but it is very smooth. With the other one you pull off a little embossing powder. It is probably hard for you to see that the embossing powder is off, but by heating it again with the heat tool, the glossy of the embossing powder reappears in many places. Now I see that I forgot the red cheeks on this envelope. I can still do that. I will use some ink from my stencil, like this. Here too I put some shadow lines in the darker parts of the balloon using a Posca marker. Wipe on a scrap paper to clean the marker and dot the cheeks and also the ears. This is a Posca marker with a thicker tip. And this is where I put some thicker shadow lines on the hearts. This makes them look a bit more rounded in shape. And I do the same on the envelope. Also some dots on the cheeks and highlights on the foot cushions, ears and the leaves on the branches. It is also handy to use the Posca to color white spots where the ink has run out, so spots you want to cover. Now I can leave the hearts as they are. I could outline the hearts with a black line, but I find that a bit too harsh. I choose to do this with colored pencils. These are the Faber-Castell pencils Black Edition, which are a bit harder and have a nice intense color. Of course, I tried it out on my scrap test paper first. To each heart I put a curl and a line like an imaginary line of a heart balloon. I'll show this more clearly with a black fine liner later. The piece of chipboard can be taken out. I might still briefly put the envelope under a pile of stuff to make it even flatter. Meanwhile, I stuck this panel onto a double folded card. On the back of my cards I always stamp a text stamp from Carlacreaties on which I write my name, Cisvolk, along with Francis People Productions. You can also find my cards on Pinterest under that name. Now if you want to protect this pretty envelope from, say, rain or a wet mailbox or dirty fingers or something, then I have a little trick for that. Here I have a jar of distress glaze and again this little tool. In it I already have the little sponge. For me that's an easy spot to store it. This way I can attach the sponge easily to the tool. And with this tool I sponge the distress glaze on the envelope very gently. I always take a quick look to make sure there's no loose pigment powder left on the envelope that might give off. And in the beginning I also apply it carefully because I don't want to smear anything. You can also do it with your fingers. It feels like Vaseline, like petroleum jelly. And then I smear it all over. You have to be careful not to smear it on the places where you want to write the address, because once it's on, you cannot write over it. Actually, you have to write the address first and then smear the distress glaze on it. The sponge looks very crumpled now, but that is recovering. It feels very sticky, like Vaseline or petroleum jelly, how you call it, but it works well. So that's the Tim Holtz distress glaze. I hope you like this tip. I briefly wipe over the surface next with a dry tissue to wipe away the greasy, and then the envelope is protected from the rain. Well, that was this card. It's going to Carla for her birthday. As a bonus card, I made another one, which actually started as a tryout on a piece of cheap watercolor paper. But I liked it enough to finish the card anyway. Using the Love Bun stencil, I stenciled the hearts quite thickly with NUVO Shimmer powder and then cut the panel slightly smaller. There I then drew lines around the panel with a thick black adding permanent marker. You can see in other videos of mine how I do this. You put your paper down and draw a straight line along it. I stamped the Dutch text with Versamark ink on black paper and embossed with white embossing powder. I cut them out and stick them onto the card using liquid glue. I will later stick the card panel on a double folded card. I stick the strips of text slightly raised by gluing 3 small scrap strips of paper on top of each other. This is a good alternative for foam tape and also thinner than foam tape, but nevertheless gives some dimension. I'm also going to make a matching envelope to go with it. For this I will use the idea of the black lines and the hearts that I want to reflect in the envelope. For this I use a ruler, on which you can also see the horizontal lines. At 1.5 centimeters from the edge, I draw a border on the envelope. With masking tape, I tape off the inside of the envelope. By drawing a line on the masking paper, I'm sure I'm cutting correctly. I use this to protect the inner part of the envelope. Again, I use the NUVO Shimmer powders and I stencil hearts on the edge of the envelope. First dip in water, then dip in the shimmer powder. Now I messed up big time with this envelope and I will tell you why. But I wanted to share this idea with you anyway, to give you some inspiration. I used too much water on the envelope to start with, and I neglected to heat emboss between applying ink on a few hearts. I also forgot to press the masking paper firmly to the envelope. As you can see, the ink has run under it on all sides. Super pity, it still looks so cheerful. It was such a nice idea. I first tried to hide some of the ink with a Posca marker, but the color keeps showing through anyway. I could also stick a white piece of paper on top. I trace the outlines of the hearts with the Stabilo fine liner. Then I make the spout of the balloon here at the bottom and I do it like this. I put a quick curl as kind of a string and spout at the same time. It's an oval and a string together. As a last resort, some Tipp-Ex maybe to get the white back. The envelope isn't perfect, but the idea is fun and I didn't want to keep it from you. Also keep going and enjoy card making while creating, even though you make mistakes. You might get some great new ideas from it and learn from your mistakes in the meantime. Even I do learn like this. I love how the black text turned out in this design, combined with the happy balloons and the black border. The koala looks as if he is climbing out of the frame directly to you. And now briefly show you all the cards. The English and Dutch stamps are mirror image of each other. You can also stamp the koalas upside down, which makes them very handy to use. I used stencils for all the cards and you can see how cheerful the cards become when you work with NUVO Shimmer powders. You can trace the edges of the stencils with all kinds of materials and you can add nice highlights with a white pen. I hope you got something out of my tips for learning to work with these shimmer powders and the fun designs by carlacreaties. You can find all my cards on my social media channels Cisvolk. Will you let me know what you think? Should you be interested in the products, links can be found in the description below the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Cisvolk and visit me on Facebook, Pinterest or Instagram. Thank you very much for watching and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye!